All right, Mr. Stolberg here. I am going to teach you our first living organisms lesson. So we are starting a new unit on living organisms. These are all the living things on planet Earth. We talked a little bit about this when we did the spheres. If you can remember what sphere that is, go ahead and say it out loud. It's the biosphere. So we're going to talk about living organisms. We're going to start today with a lesson on classifying living things. So I'm just going to go through the slides that are assigned to you on Google Classroom. You are welcome to go through the slides and complete them on your own, but I thought some of you might want a little additional instruction, so that's why I'm making myself available live, and then I will post this recording on the Facebook page as well so that you can find it. That way, everybody's got information in a couple different ways. You can read it right in front of you, but if you watch this video or listen to me talk about it live, then you can ask more questions and you'll get a little bit more information because as I'm talking, I'm going to kind of explain some things. So it's worth listening and getting that extra information. So let's talk about how scientists classify living things. Scientists classify living things to make it easier to find and share information about them. It helps them relate similar living things to each other. Think about it this way. If a scientist discovers a new animal, if they don't have a system set aside to classify that new animal, they're not going to know what it is. They're not going to know how to explain it, describe it to other people. But if they can look at it and say, well, hey, it has 2 legs, has wings, it has feathers, it has a beak. I know what kind of animal that is. It's a bird. Now you've got it in a category, and now you can kind of look at other birds, find out what it has similar, and further classify it and figure out what that bird actually is. So it's very important to be able to classify these living things. There are 7 classification categories that scientists use. The biggest one is kingdom, and then it gets smaller and smaller from there. It goes kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Now, species is the one you're probably most familiar with. The species would be the actual name of that particular animal, like an ostrich is a species of bird. But the kingdom is kind of the big, broad category, and we're going to talk about that first. So we're going to talk about 5 kingdoms. Sometimes scientists might say there are 6 kingdoms. They argue over how many there actually are because sometimes those last couple, they just lump together in one thing. The first 4, though, are pretty much always the same. In fact, they are always the same. It's going to be animals. You should be familiar with the animal kingdom because you are part of the animal kingdom. Animals have many cells, and they eat living things. They consume to get food. Plants also have many cells, but they are producers. They make their own food. Fungi, I'll tell you a joke about that one later. Fungi are organisms, they're called decomposers. They absorb food from living and non-living things, but again, they're complicated organisms. They have many cells, just like plants and animals. Then we get to the more simpler organisms, like the protist. They make their own food or they eat other living things. It can be a little bit of both on those. And monorans, which are 1 cell, no cell nuclei. These are your microscopic type of organisms, ones you can't necessarily see with your own eyes. So here's some examples of those different kingdoms to kind of give you an idea of how to picture it. The animal kingdom is so big and so huge. There are so many things in it. There are vertebrates and invertebrates, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. So it gives you a very wide spectrum. There's everything from a horse to a bug to a fly. Earthworms, sea sponges are part of the animal kingdom. Even though you think they're just something you use in a kitchen, there's actually a live animal called a sea sponge. Doesn't do much, but it's still classified as an animal. And then there's the plant kingdom. You should know most of what plants are, what they look like, everything from grass and moss to trees. So they can be very small or very huge. Then there's the fungi. Mushrooms are probably going to be one you're most familiar with there, but mold and yeast are part of that also. We did an experiment earlier in the year with yeast. So that's actually a living thing. And then when you get to the monorans, we're talking about microscopic organisms like bacteria. And then protists, there might be some microscopic things in there as well. But the thing you're going to be most familiar with in protists is algae. You've probably heard of algae before. It's that green stuff that starts growing on your fish tank if you don't keep it clean or have a little fish in there to eat it up. So that's an example of a protist. And so some protists can be producers just like plants. All right, so let's talk about the animal kingdom more specifically. This is the one we're going to spend most of our time on when we're talking about living organisms. When we get to food chains and that stuff later, we're definitely going to be mostly talking about plants and animals, maybe some decomposers in there as well. So animals can be classified into two groups. There's two kinds of animals if you break them down really simple. There are vertebrates. Those are animals with a backbone. Go ahead, feel your bone. Feel your back right now. There's a bone right back there called your spine. Animals have that backbone to keep everything together as part of a skeletal system that we have on the inside, known as an endoskeleton. Now, some invertebrates, they don't have a backbone. They don't have that skeleton inside, but some of them, not all of them, will have a hard protective coating on the outside, or shell, whatever you'd like to call it. And that is known as an exoskeleton. So think of an ant. If you step on one, they're a little crunchy, right? That's because they have that exoskeleton. Please don't step on ants. I'm not telling you to go out in there and do that. Public service announcement, be kind to all creatures. So if you look at this diagram right over here on the side, you can tell that there are a lot more invertebrates out there in the world than there are vertebrates. But we're mostly used to seeing vertebrates. We go to the zoo and, Mommy, can I see the tiger? Oh, I want to see the gorilla. Oh, look at the lions. Those are all vertebrates, right? We're not going, Mommy, can I see the earthworms? Right? So the invertebrates we don't notice as much because they're a lot smaller. But because they're smaller, there's an ability for there to be a huge amount of them. There's a lot of them in the ocean as well. Over here, I've got a picture of a jellyfish as an example of an invertebrate. They don't have a backbone like Mr. Bear over here. So invertebrates, very plentiful, cover a lot of the earth, but vertebrates are pretty cool. We like a lot of vertebrates with the backbones and their skeletons and their ferociousness. All right, so let's go on to the next thing here. So now that we have talked about both vertebrates and invertebrates, you got to do a little bit of learning on your own. You are going to click both of these links. One will take you to Study Jams to see a slideshow of different invertebrates. Look at the pictures, read the information on the bottom. The other one will take you to a slideshow of vertebrates. Look at the pictures, read the information on the bottom. When you are done with both of those, there is a little test yourself quiz. Click the button, take that quiz, and then come down here, and you'll have to take it out of present mode, but come in here and type your score into these little boxes here. How many did you get correctly for vertebrates and invertebrates? This will give me some information to see how much more I need to teach you about these two subjects. So please do that and let me know how you did by submitting this on Google Classroom and turning it in. I will be back tomorrow for another lesson as we further classify animals by taking that vertebrate category that I said we were going to spend a lot of time on and talk about, and breaking it down even further into some separate categories in there. Thank you for listening to this. I'm sure I have been wonderful. You've been wonderful too. Keep working, keep studying, and let's get these lessons done together. All right. Thank you very much.